Last module, real quick, I promise. Performance measures. So here's the 2 minutes on performance measures. 2 minutes, just on this one slide, then we're going to go on to the other one. Now here's the 2-minute history of performance measures. So in 2006, HUD established a performance measurement system. It's listed in the Federal Register, dated March 7, 2006. And the challenge they were trying to solve is that if you can imagine, how many grantees do we have nationally now, CDBG grantees? 1,200. 1,200. Can you imagine trying to aggregate performance information on 1,200 grantees that reported differently? Can you imagine trying to say, what did CDBG accomplish? And making a report to Congress about how important the program is, trying to articulate, we all accomplished this when everyone reports it differently. So this is all about standardizing performance measurement and reporting so that HUD can aggregate that information on a national level and report it up to Congress. So that it all makes sense about how important the program is, what we're accomplishing. Okay, so that's the history of why how we got to this performance measurement system that you guys see today in your consolidated plan in IDIS. Okay? So it establishes a common performance measurement framework to apply to all 4 CPD formula programs. So ESG, HOPWA, HOME, CDBG. Okay? Outcome measures are driven by local intent. You determine the outcome measures that you're going to establish for your programs. Okay, those are defined locally. You apply indicators that are collected commonly amongst all grantees, so things like housing units, businesses assisted, jobs created, okay, services provided. Okay, so those are common indicators, and HUD rolls those up to results at the national level. Okay, so it just standardizes performance measurement across the board. So there's 3 objectives. Where have you seen these before? These are not national objectives. Something's not the answer. Do these look like the CDBG primary objectives? Okay, so yes, you knew they were objectives. Yes, you're right. So these are the 3 CDBG primary objectives, okay, of the CDBG program. So HUD took those primary objectives and say these are a great objective framework for rolling up entitlement funding on a national level, okay? So this reflects the statutory purposes of the 4 programs, and it ties directly to HUD's strategic plan, okay? So in addition to those 3 objectives, you have 3 outcomes, and you guys have seen these before when you're reporting through your CAPER and your IDIS: availability, accessibility, affordability, sustainability. So these 3 outcomes tie to those 3 objectives. You choose one objective, you choose one outcome, you create an outcome statement, okay? So to determine the most appropriate outcome for an activity, ask, what type of change or result am I seeking? Am I looking to impact the affordability of housing? Am I looking to impact the availability or accessibility of housing? Or is it sustainability of housing? So depending on the activity that you're undertaking, you choose the most appropriate objective or outcome to fit that activity, okay? And what that results in, again, is an outcome statement by tying an objective and an outcome to produce an outcome statement, okay? So it just gives you some context for how HUD wants you to describe your performance in relationship to the objective and outcome statement, okay? So there's 4 common indicators that apply to all activities, and then there's specific indicators that you select and choose depending on that activity, okay? So the 4 common ones are, HUD wants to know how much money was leveraged through this activity or this project. Okay, we talked about the importance of documenting the amount of funds that were leveraged in IDIS. Okay, the number of persons, households, business units assisted. Okay, that's a common indicator. The income levels, remember we're documenting income and recording that in IDIS. Race, ethnicity, disability data for activities that currently report these data. So those are your 4 common indicators, the 4 common things you're going to be reporting on, okay? Then you have specific indicators depending on the type of activity that you're funding. So if you're doing public facilities, public services, targeted revitalization through an NRSA, for example, if you're addressing brownfields, you choose the appropriate indicator that represents your outcome statement, okay? And again, choosing the appropriate indicator that applies. So performance measures in IDIS. You need to determine who, how, when IDIS data is entered. For some activities, it's entered at setup, okay? Some activities happen at completion. What's that type of activity that happens? You don't know who you're assisting until the project's completed. Rental, acquisition and rental. You don't know who those beneficiaries are until they actually occupy the unit, right? Okay. And then some activities incrementally until completion, things like public services where you're serving people over a period of time, those kind of things, okay? So just keep aware of when you have to enter the information depending on the activity. So some of the challenges to look out for that HUD wants to make sure you're aware of is lumping multiple eligible activities into a single activity. Okay, this happens a lot. So for instance, setting up one activity for rehabilitation of a youth facility, park, and sidewalk as one single activity. That's 3 separate activities in IDIS. Okay, don't combine them into one activity. Aggregating LMA activities with different service areas into one activity. Okay, very important. 3 separate activities, have different service areas. Don't combine in the same thing just because they're all public services, okay? You really have to look at, as Rudy went on his diagram that was on the board, how to determine what the service area is. Yes?
So, as far as these activities go in IDIS, let's say you wanted to do you wanted to acquire some property, then you wanted to demo the substandard structure, and then let's say you wanted to build a new house and sell it. Are these all different little activities, or is it one?
If that is conceived in the entire project, that you're going to acquire, demo, and reconstruct, that's one project. That's one project. You set that up as a rehab activity. Okay? A note here, misuse of capacity building matrix codes. I've seen this happen as well. So the mistake the grantee makes is they provide capacity building for an activity that is not eligible. So we talked about the capacity building for nonprofit organizations that are going to carry out a specific CDBG activity has its own matrix code. Okay, it's not general capacity building of staff or anything like that. Okay, so just be careful. There might be multiple matrix codes that apply to an activity in theory, but choosing the appropriate one is what matters. Okay. Use the incorrect matrix code 05R, 14H, or 13 for housing counseling only activities. If it's housing counseling only, it's a public service, right? If it's housing counseling in conjunction with down payment assistance, it's down payment assistance activity or 13, matrix code 13, okay? Incorrectly reporting Energy Star certified housing units. Just because a housing unit has Energy Star appliances does not make it Energy Star certified, okay? You laugh, but it happens. Oh my God. Missing accomplishment data for the code enforcement activities. Again, code enforcement is meant to be a targeted effort. You need to be able to document what area you're servicing, where the inspectors were working. Okay, so you need to be able to document that. What did you accomplish through that code enforcement? Grantees may no longer cancel activities withdrawals without obtaining field office approval. I'm sure you guys are aware of this now. You can generate the PR59 to look at requests for cancel activities withdrawals. Resources for at-risk activities. So again, there's some resources out there that detail what to do when you have at-risk activities in IDIS. There's a Q&A link here that'll walk you through some of the common questions and answers related to that. Several online reports that you can generate to keep up to date with how your program is progressing, how you're accomplishing what you set out to accomplish. Several reports here. Rudy talked about a very important one, which is PR56, CDBG timeliness report. To make sure you're spending your dollars accordingly. There is a specific IDIS report, PR84, that looks at if you have an NRSA, what you're doing in that NRSA, what you're accomplishing in that NRSA. So it's good to pull that report if you have an NRSA in your consolidated plan. Again, on your thumb drive, you have the CDBG IDIS online manual, as well as several other IDIS-related resources in there. Refer to that resources, whether you're familiar with IDIS or not. It'll kind of give you an expectation of what needs to go in IDIS, as Rudy demonstrated earlier. Putting it all together. So I think you have this handout or this slide blown up in your in your packet there. Believe it or not, we've addressed the majority of these steps. Okay, this is called the CDBG Stairway to Activity Compliance. Okay? We looked at determining whether an activity is eligible. Remember the exercise we went through? Mm-hmm. We looked at determining how an activity meets a national objective. Remember Rudy walked you through that? We looked at the consolidated plan process and the citizen participation process associated with that. We looked at making sure that the project is physically and financially feasible. Talked about underwriting economic development projects, housing projects. We talked about, does the grantee and or their subrecipients have capacity to carry out the projects? Okay, we talked about that. Making sure you choose your partners appropriately. Underwriting done for housing or economic development activities. Remember, for economic development, we talked about Appendix A and the underwriting guidelines associated with that, as well as Section 108 criteria. Does the project meet other federal requirements? We just went over the cross-cutting federal requirements, okay? That's one of the things you have to determine if you're going to be in compliance with CDBG requirements. And then we had a whole session on record keeping and the importance of making sure that, what was the three-legged stool again that we talked about?
Reasonable.
I blame myself. I should not have asked that question. I blame myself. I'm sorry. It's late. I should not have asked that question. The three-legged stool was eligible activity, national objective. So apparently there's multiple types of stools. The stool I'm talking about is the one I talked about on day one. Okay? Eligible activity, national objective, documentation for compliance. I'm presenting, so I'm talking about the one I'm talking about. Call it a stool, a chair, whatever it is. Documentation for compliance. Okay, so we covered all this. That's it. That is it.